28 days later. Perhaps the epitome of the apocalypse subgenre, with its unique imagery, horrifying story, and original take on the genre, director Danny Boyle and screenwriter Alex Garland were able to create one of the most memorable films of the early noughties, and in my opinion, the perfect apocalypse movie. Since its release in 2002, it has been engraved into pop culture because of how well it managed to flesh out the concept of an apocalypse. Heck, it's no wonder that when COVID occurred and everyone was ordered to stay indoors, which left the streets pretty much abandoned, everyone was comparing it to the opening of this movie. I'm even guilty of this in my Sonic movie trilogy video, where I briefly mentioned how the first Sonic movie was released just before the virus outbreak, and I proceeded to show a clip from 28 Days Later. But it's not just that iconic scene of Cillian Murphy walking around the deserted London that makes this film stand out above the crowd. In fact, I think there are three main components as to why people continue to hold this in high regards, starting with: to anyone who says they don't like this film because it looks horrible, well, that's the point. It's an apocalypse. Were you expecting sunshine and rainbows? This was thanks to the camera that they used during filming, the Canon XL1 digital video camera, which gave the film its grainy look. Most apocalypse films before and after this just shoot normally, which does look better, but doesn't draw you into its horrific world nearly as much as this. In fact, the only apocalypse movie I can think of since this movie's release that went for a grainy approach was Shaun of the Dead. But for others like Zombieland and Train to Busan, they just used the standard camera equipment and colour gradients for the time. With the Canon XL1's size, it meant it was manoeuvrable, so it was easy to film scenes such as the empty M1 motorway and the deserted central London. You may be wondering how these scenes were even possible, considering that London is one of the biggest cities in the world. Well, in the case of this shot, where Jim is walking outside of Downing Street and there's this overturned double-decker bus, the filmmakers seek permission by the Westminster City Council in order to film and place the bus outside of Downing Street. The council obviously said no, because Downing Street is literally where our head of government stays and works. And the fact that this was filmed around the time of the September 11th attacks in New York City pretty much solidified that this couldn't be done. Until the filmmakers were continuing filming in the morning and saw that there was no one from the council stopping them, so they quickly flipped the bus and filmed the entire scene within the span of 20 minutes. For the film's cinematography, it uses two key camera shots in order to make you feel uncomfortable. The first being the well-known Dutch angle, and how the shot is rooted into a majority of the film's chosen shots, whether it be two characters having a conversation, Cillian Murphy wandering around a deserted London, or just simply showing the infected whenever they're introduced in a scene. Probably the most well-known films to frequently use this shot is the Mission Impossible franchise. You look at any one of the 8 films and you won't be able to go more than 10 minutes without the use of a Dutch angle. The iconic vault scene in the first installment uses plenty in order to create tension for the audience, and it is exactly the same for 28 Days Later, or any movie in fact. Going back to the conversation between Cillian Murphy and Brendan Gleeson, the reason there's tension in the scene is because we are unsure if Frank and his daughter are trustworthy. They do end up being integral allies to Jim and Selena, but in that moment, when you're watching this scene for the first time, you have no idea if Frank and his daughter are actually helping Selena and Jim. The second camera shot that is integral is the tracking shot, which is specifically used when an infected person is about to attack someone. The first scene in which this shot is used is genius, because the shot appears out of nowhere when Jim is watching a home video of him and his recently deceased parents. But whilst this is happening, the tracking shot appears out of nowhere, along with the sound being brought over from the previous shot, in order to make your nervousness skyrocket, until it's revealed that it's one of the infected. It works kind of like a double jump scare. You're startled that you get this silent, fast moving shot hurling towards you. Then you get the aftermath, which is 2 infected humans attacking Jim. What also helps is that these shots are also handheld, which allows the camera to move around frantically and unsteadily, like an infected would, which adds more creepiness before the jump scares. I'll start this segment by saying this. In your favourite apocalypse movie, how does that apocalypse start? Films like Mad Max and Night of the Living Dead don't brush over this concept too much, and instead rely on the audience's thoughts to fill in how their hellscape expanded into what they become. There's nothing wrong with using this narrative technology, but if you're playing the concept of an apocalypse completely straight, like both films do, you might as well gloss into the realism of the world that you're building. For 28 Days Later, the opening scene of the film tells us all we need to know about how the virus started, and how the infected act with animal activists infiltrating a lab that holds aggressive chimpanzees, and one of them just so happens to have a highly infectious rage virus. Just that sentence alone still sounds relatable to this day, with the amount of animal rights related incidents, or any rights group related incidents that are happening now compared to 20 years ago. And following this scene, we have Jim waking up in a hospital and roaming around London for a solid 10 minutes. The most important aspect of this whole section is that we find out about the devastation of the world and the state that it's left in because of the apocalypse at the same time as Jim. We learn that there's literally no one around, that there has been no effort to claim back the abandoned streets of London, that there was an evacuation that we and Jim did not witness. It's this connection that we have with Jim that allows us to be more intrigued with what's to happen. We haven't been told information at the start that the protagonist discovers a lot later than we have. An example where this has been shown to improve the quality of anything that is storytelling related is Stranger Things. Compare Season 1 with Season 3. In Season 1, we learn what the Upside Down is, where Eleven came from, what happened to Will, at the same time as the characters, creating a story that allows us wanting more, and is why the first season is the best one in my opinion. However, in Season 3, the opening scene shows way too much and doesn't leave much for the imagination, by showing us that the Russians are trying to open a new gate to the Upside Down below the Starcourt Mall, because the next few episodes focuses on the characters catching up with what we already know, and this is why I think the third season is the worst, and is why I think 28 Days Later is superior to 28 Weeks Later, as the world isn't expanded upon and we're not as terrified by the infected anymore. Another key aspect about the story is how it treats its characters. Case in point, Mark. I think his death is the most important in the entire film. More important than Frank, more important than Major Henry West. Here's my reasoning. Characters introduced this early on, especially in apocalypse films, do not die early on. So when Mark gets bitten by one of the infected, and Selena has no choice but to turn him into a doner kebab, it takes us by surprise. This single death sets the notion that anyone can fall victim to the infected, no matter their screen time, no matter what point they're introduced in the film, leaving us intrigued for who will be taken next. Another key piece of the story that sets it out from other apocalypse films is its focus on other survivors, specifically the army. I'll touch more on them in the next segment, but in terms of story structure, the army gives us the concept of not every survivor is nice at all. Films like Mad Max and Zombieland both have their own approach to this, with Mad Max having a motorbike gang causing havoc on everyone they see. And with Zombieland, whilst Wichita and Little Rock are good, integral characters, when they're introduced, they are extremely untrustworthy and manipulative. But at the end of the day, both of these survivors, you're expecting them to be bad, because of the uncertainty of how they'll act around others, until it's revealed in one of the worst ways. But for the army, well, it's the army. They're meant to protect and serve. Seeing their desperate need for females shows how badly the apocalypse has affected them. I know this film technically doesn't include zombies, but the infected are very clearly inspired by them. So I'll ask you this, what is a key characteristic of a zombie? I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, time's up. Some of yous will say their movement and how they walk very, very slow. If you were to decipher a human and a zombie from a distance, this is the first thing you point out. Honestly, thinking about zombies in movies before this, you're not afraid if there's 1 or 2 zombies. You're only scared if there's a few hundred of them surrounding you. Now what if there were 1 or 2 zombies, but they run at the same pace as humans? This concept is not only 1,000 times more terrifying, but it's also 1,000 times more believable that an apocalypse could leave basic civilization on the brink of non-existence.
Oh, right, yeah, of course.
Later films like World War Z and I Am Legend also utilise this characteristic from this movie, which, like I said before, helps to raise the stakes that the characters are facing. Because if you really think about it, how exactly are slow zombies meant to take over the world if they walk at 2 miles an hour? Whilst for a zombie running at 18 miles an hour, it's more than self-explanatory. To further back up this point, I'd like to take a look at this scene, where the 4 characters are in a tunnel and they need to change the tyre. And to establish that the infected are hunting them down, we get this silent shot. Would this shot be nearly as impactful if the infected were just hobbling along?
No!
And would the stakes in this scene be higher if the infected were hobbling or sprinting? I think you know the answer for that one. Further talking about the characteristics, what also sets them apart from other zombie-like beings in cinema is their eyes. Look into my eyes. The marketing team knew exactly what they were doing when they put them slap bang at the top of the posters. What separates this design from others is that most zombie creatures just have normal eyes, normal body parts, normal left elbow. The eyes also help sell the fact that these creatures that the characters are dealing with are pretty much too late to save. They act like a literal wall that the characters can't break down. which is more apparent when you realise that none of the infected end up being cured throughout the entire movie's runtime. But we are given a multitude of different ways in how someone can be infected. There's the standard being bitten trope, but there's also the process of an infected blood being mixed with standard blood. With this little piece of information, we go from thinking that the infected can be fought just like zombies, to hoping that you stay well away from them. But unfortunately, the infected aren't the only life form that the characters need to worry about. Having the army as a secondary threat may just be as terrifying as the infected, simply because they're human. For the infected, you may be able to shoot them or drive away from them, but not humans. They can attempt the 2 actions that I just mentioned. Also, these are army soldiers we are talking about. They're well built, well trained, warlike mentalities. In a way, the perfect killing machine. Heck, just look at Jim standing next to Major Henry West. So when you realise that the soldiers want the 2 female characters for stuff, your brain switches from seeing the infected as more of a threat to the soldiers. And what scene to emphasise this more than this moment when Jim and the sergeant are about to be executed? When we see the pile of dead bodies, we realise that this isn't the first time that the soldiers have had to execute people, leaving us wondering what other horrendous war crimes they've committed, and solidifying just how far some people will go to remain sane in such a crippling landscape as an apocalypse. There's plenty more I can mention about what makes this the perfect apocalypse movie, like the music or the world building, but I don't want to make this video about 25 minutes long. My storage isn't the best.
Death Wish!
Not to mention that I would have had to mention a lot more of the 28 film series. That is continuing very soon with the release of 28 Years Later, which may or may not be out by the time I release this video because of my terrible upload schedule. And there's another film in the franchise after that, releasing next year. But even without the film's sequels, I think it says a lot that a film that looks like this and tackles very unique and sensitive subjects managed to be one of the most influential apocalypse movies of all time. It has not aged a bit. The majority of its themes that it dissects, such as isolation and survival, could not have been more relatable during the times of COVID. Deserted streets, nothing going on, infected people running around everywhere. Actually, no, they weren't infected. They were just crackheads.